Well, hi everybody. Professor Jen over here. Today's Saturday. Happy Saturday. Love to tape. Always a thank you to Captioning Services for everything that you do for us. Really getting together all of our worlds at the same time in the same place so we can have dialogue and discourse. Really an art form, really talent. So thank you again. We are coming to the close of this semester. This has really been such a wonderful opportunity for me to share ideas with you, thoughts, observations. I truly will miss this semester, having read all of your thoughts, your observations, etc. It just felt like such a meaningful transaction. So I thank you in advance to my class. Anyhow, my dears, you see I have my picture up. Always have my picture up. I have to say, to my husband's credit, he always helps me find these interesting little pictures. So, this particular picture, Fatal Attraction, 30 some odd years ago, a pivotal film, and I'll share with you why I'm going to discuss this film as it relates really to issues of really literary, cultural studies, pop culture, uh, bringing the title of a film into everyday nomenclature, vernacular for many decades, many persons, many generations. Will just simply sum up a scenario by saying, well, it was a fatal attraction. And I just find it so interesting that sometimes we have films, right? Stay with me on this. We have a film or a song, right? That all we have to do is say the title in conversation, and we really get the gist of what it is that we're trying to share with somebody. This particular film was so very important for a variety of reasons and it stood the test of time, but yet time did strange things with the reception of this film. When the film first came out, the film was about a man and a woman. And this woman was in her 30s and this man was close to 40 and he was married, she wasn't. And they had a sexual affair, lasted like 2 days. And on the screen, as it relates to cultural studies, it was explosive for the time and place. It was intimate. It wasn't just gratuitous sexual activity. It had intimacy. It really mirrored this whole idea of lust and wanting and sexual gratification, and that's fine. 30 years ago, we were sort of in new territory with that. Today, we're not. So, time and place is always important to keep in mind. Anyway, from this 2-day tryst, he's ready to sort of move on. He's had sex with this woman. He had two great dates, a couple meals. They went out dancing. He was able to have a departure from his ordinary life. His ordinary life included a wife and a small child and a dog and a career. And I guess maybe looking at the film now and its ideas, I could say to you, having been, in my 30s, 40s, 50s at one time, I could say to you, I understand that whole idea of monotony. You wake up, you're in the same situation you were a day before, a week before, a year before, a decade before. So this character of this male Dan, he's understandable because he's really reacting in this affair, in this sexual tryst. He's acting from a place where he's sort of trying to have a departure from his everyday life. Now, Alex, the woman, she's not really looking for a departure. She also wants the same thing. She wants sex, lust, orgasm, excitement, a couple dates, a couple nice meals. Same thing Dan wants, except in this tryst, this 2-day affair, she winds up pregnant from this 2-day affair. So in the 1990s, when people first began discussing this film, really, actually, I should correct myself, 1987. That's how far back we're going to go. 1987. People said in about the film Fatal Attraction. Well, this whole film is a story about the whole situation being her fault. And her fault was 30 some odd years ago that she should never have bothered with a married man who had all of these intricacies, all of these relationships. Or here's another phrase we used to use in pop culture at my time. He had all these strings attached, okay? He has strings on him. That was the phrase. and he had all these strings on him, and she should have known better, and she got what she deserved. What woman? I'm just sharing with you. Don't get all upset. I'm just sharing with you what people said of this film 30 some odd years ago as it relates to pop culture then and now. And they'd say, well, she should have known better. She shouldn't have interfered. And she. That was the explanation for this film. Many years later, as women and gender sexuality studies entered the realm of culture and pop culture, men's studies started to become more of a discussion, had more foundational dialogue, right? The idea that people are, like Walt Whitman said, you remember him? He said, men and women are opposite equals, right? But nobody knew what to do with that when Walt Whitman said it because we weren't thinking in those terms. You're trying to figure out who Walt Whitman was. He wrote Leaves of Grass, very famous little piece. And sometime when you have a chance, you should read it. But that's who he was, okay? He was a I would say, a conservative writer with conservative ideas, but yet he too could make the departure that he could look at things, multidimensional. He didn't have to be, the same writer all the time. That's why Walt Whitman has really stood the test of time. Anyhow, back to this, Fatal Attraction. So here we are many years later, different generations later, right? Pop culture often dependent on, the values, mores, and dialogue of the day, current time that we're discussing. And now we've done really uh, a whole turnaround about this film as it relates to gender studies. And we say what Dan gets in this film, Dan opened the door. If not for this married guy with all these strings on him, if he had just kept walking away, he wouldn't have found himself in this situation. And many persons now critique the film instead of Dan having been the victim 30 some odd years ago in receiving this film. We now say Alex was the victim, that he impregnated her and immediately said, I'll pay for the abortion. He says all these things to her in the film. And we say now today, he wasn't really trying to empower her. He was really trying to put her in a place that he felt was necessary because he had his fun, he had his time, and now he needed to discard her. You see, we didn't have this language in pop culture. Like today, we talk in narcissism. I'm just going to give you an example. I like to bring in psychology, sociology, anthropology, all of the ologies, right? Studying of human behavior, the human species, how it is we think, we feel, we act, react. You know, he needs to discard her. Today, we talk so often in this language about discard phase, where the person might have gotten what they wanted, whether it's employment or it's a relationship or it's financial assistance. They've said all the right things, they've done all the right things, but now they're done with you. They're done with you. They need you to go away. They've taken the best, here's another saying. I love to talk about how this has to do with our everyday lives and literary and cultural studies. How we say they've cherry picked the best part of your life, strawberry pick. You say, well, what does this phrase mean? What it really means is, let me give you a visual. It means you go to the grocery store, right? We all have this common experience. You buy like a little basket of blueberry, cherry, strawberry, but instead of taking exactly what's, you know, pre-put into the vessel, you say, oh, I'm going to open the package and I'm going to cherry pick. I'm going to take all the best that are always on the top, right? Because you're not going to buy a product in marketing that looks like who did it and ran. You always want the best. And then very often in cherry picking, people will say, skim off the top. There's another saying we find, skimming off the top of all of these other cherries from packages, and we make a beautiful package. In other words, we don't want to take the good with the bad. Boy, I'm full of them today. Don't want to take the good with the bad. We just want all of the best, we cherry pick. So we say today in men's studies, women's studies, relationship studies, etc., as a science, we say today, oh, Dan went and looked at this Alex and he cherry picked. He took all the best she had to offer over a 2-day period, got her pregnant. Uh, he didn't use protection either. That never comes over in the film in the 1980s. You know, the idea of his responsibility, his physical responsibility, his sexual responsibility, his moral responsibility, nothing. It's never even broached because back then it just wasn't the discussion. It was a one-sided story. And so throughout the course of the film, we never really blamed Dan. In fact, we're sort of made to feel like he's the sympathetic character, that we should be looking at him, this poor guy, he gets wrapped up with this woman. But we really don't see it from her perspective, you know? Very often in contemporary film, contemporary meaning in the now, for our purposes, contemporary shows, contemporary media, we try to look at things from all aspects, you know. Today, I think our viewership, our audience demands it, you know. I don't think we no longer accept roles, accept what we're told as to who will be the sympathetic character, who we're going to feel sorry for. I think what became very evident to me in cinema and in film and television that it now sort of seems to be in vogue that a director, producer, etc., scriptwriter, scriptmaster leaves it up to the audience to decide. In other words, I don't think we are so blindly led into believing who we should feel sorry for. I think LGBTQ, I think awareness in general of relationships, fairness, equity, etc., has made it so we can look at one situation in a variety of ways. I'll give you another example because I like to talk about film and media. This is probably one of my best subjects for myself. So there's this wonderful writer named Amy Tan, Amytan. And Amy Tan wrote some amazing things, wrote a lot about Asian studies, Asian relationships, and two particular notable pieces that Amy wrote was Bonesetter's Daughter, excellent book if you ever have time and you say you have nothing else to do and you'd like a good read. Excellent book. And then of course, Joy Luck Club. Joy Luck Club was also made into a film. So it's just interesting how even all these decades later, 3 decades later and change, when sometimes people talk about Asian beauty, Asian culture, a difficulty that comes about in Asian culture as it comes about with any other culture. Every culture has some aspect of difficulty to navigate, negotiate, because we're juxtapositioning traditional thought with contemporary thought. And sometimes in language, we will say, oh, well, it's a Joy Luck Club situation. So if you read the book and or if you saw the film, just to even say that phrase, we understand when we say it's a Joy Luck scenario, Joy Luck Club scenario. What are we saying? We're saying it has to do with, of course, Asian culture. We're saying it has to do with honor, has to do with relationships and immigration. And so very often we have these sayings that come into our nomenclature, our vernacular, that are really birthed, you know, given life from the title of a book and or a film. I can do this for you in another example. We had a film in the 1990s when computers, I know you think computers have been around since the dinosaurs, but they really haven't. In fact, one of my new hobbies is I sit around when I have nothing else to do and I watch films from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, etc. I go back around the 80s just because I was your age and in college in the 80s. And I watch film, right? And I say, how could this be different today? How would it be different if they had cell phones, text, sext, instant message, Facebook platforms, email, fax machines, right? The dialogue would even be different. You know, like look at the Die Hard films. They would even be different for those of you who watch classic television, classic cinema. Would be much different if they had texting ability and cell phones and portability. Anyhow, we had this film. If you're ever bored, watch this one. Good film because it has to do a little with a word that you will know. The word will be catfishing. See, back in my day, we didn't have this word as it relates to, identity and putting forth a persona that you wish to have, but you might not have, or it's not legitimate, or it's flawed, right? It's a ruse, it's a trap. So we had this film, Single White Female. When it came out, it was all the rage, right? In pop culture. You say why, right? Because first of all, a great deal of the film had to do with the use of email, chat rooms, and computers, which fascinated people 30 years ago because it just wasn't part of culture. It wasn't part of how we did business. So much of this semester, I've talked to you about how we get the news now, how it is that we make plans, how it is that we're entertained, our own self-diagnosis on WebMD. All of a sudden, I'm a 2 a.m. doctor. I'm busy diagnosing myself. There are problems with having all these platforms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By the time you're done, you think you're going to die by 6 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? But in Single White Female, it brought to us very quickly this whole idea of transformation, that somebody could be who they are, right? But then decide they don't like who they are, or it's just too difficult to change, or there's too many details. And all of a sudden, we can hide behind technology. This is 30 years ago, my dears. Hide behind technology and recreate ourselves like overnight, which was what this film was about. Here we are now in 2025. If I were to say to people my age, well, it was a single white female situation, they completely get it. Completely. We don't even have to have further dialogue. They get it. It means that the person catfished. It means that they made transformation over the course of one or two keystrokes. They're not who they said they were. There's no way to check, etc. And and that they became, sort of a paragon of a new lifestyle, a new persona overnight with very little footprint behind them, you know? So I think about all of these topics in pop culture. I'll give you another example. In the 1990s, again, revolutionary period of time in film and literature, also in music, because people started talking about real issues. Not that they didn't before, but it became so acceptable. I'll give you, in fact, two examples. One in media, everyday media, television, and one in film. We'll start with Murphy Brown. You probably don't know this show, but of course, if I were to say to somebody my age and older, it was a Murphy Brown situation, we would get it. You understand? You know exactly what that means. It means Murphy Brown was one of the very first women in her 30s who was a professional person. This is her character I'm describing, Murphy Brown show. A comedic show, 30 minutes once a week, very entertaining. And she was a single parent and was doing her pregnancy by herself. And so, of course, this caused a lot of issues. This caused a lot of societal issues, a lot of commentary, uh, a lot of stigma, a lot of criticism, because we were forging this new place where we could be entertained by a very intelligent uh, person. And we could also see that this person in character was taking on this role of parenting, this voyage of sorts, all by herself. It was like out of the norm, you know? So we would say it was a Murphy Brown situation. Were we ready at that time for this kind of television, that kind of dialogue and pop culture? Whether we were ready or not, we got it. Shortly thereafter, there was another show, Friends. Friends, Jennifer Aniston. What was a little different about that show, of course, she's also unmarried as she finds out she's pregnant, but she sort of has the support of the father of her baby. And so maybe we were at that place in the late 1990s, early 2000s, where we could accept this change, this sea change of culture and tradition. You see? So, even back in my day, 1990s, early 2000s, we would say it was a friend situation. Again, we understood. Now, to give you an example in film, cinema, we had a wonderful film called Philadelphia. Very good film. All about this young man played by Tom Hanks. You know that name, I'm sure. Forrest Gump, etc. Uh, and he happened to have AIDS, HIV. And the film was all about his situation, having AIDS, HIV, HIV. You know, in the 1980s, we whispered AIDS, HIV. I don't even think we gave it voice, you know. We we had so many myths surrounding AIDS, HIV, and people did not want to discuss it. They didn't even want to envelop the idea that this was really happening to persons. People, instead of running close to the scenario. People wanted to back away. I remembered at the time I had this internship working in publishing for this magazine in Manhattan. And so you would think, you know, Manhattan, New York City, publishing, everybody would be speaking about AIDS, HIV. I'm telling you, it was whispered in the hallway. Anyway, I work with this man. We'll just call him Paul. And I work with this man who at the time, so this is like 1980, 83-ish, 84. Uh, he had had a lot of health issues. He was significantly young, like maybe 24, 25, had just graduated from college, had a degree in creative arts, creative writing, etc. He was a very good essayist, wrote all kinds of publication, worked for the magazine where I had my internship. And people were whispering about his health condition, you know. And and the sicker he got, right? Just like in the film Philadelphia, the more people sort of moved away from him to the point where he was socially isolated, economically isolated, uh, just in a situation where again, instead of walking towards him to help him and to be supportive, people were walking away. And that was really, you know, that saying actions speak louder than words. That was the situation. And I remember at the end of my internship, I really didn't understand the whole dynamic because I was in a different place in time, mentally, intellectually, socially, academically. I just wanted to do well at this internship. I really wasn't privy to all of these intricacies going on in the community of this publishing company and magazine. And then I left the internship because I did everything I said I would do, went back to SUNY Oswego. And then I remember I got a piece of, you know, regular mail. We had no email back then, no text, no nothing. Got a piece of regular mail announcing that this Paul had passed away. And I just thought to myself, you know, after I had done some correspondence with other persons, I came to realize he really sort of died alone without much family acknowledgement, without any friends to acknowledge. And certainly coworkers spoke of his condition after the fact, you know, and then that was it. Just very unceremonious, similar to the film Philadelphia. It was a place and time where people just did not want to acknowledge these kinds of catastrophic, certainly at that time, we didn't have, you know, different med preps, etc. But instead of embracing somebody who's going through such a hard time, the idea was to duck and cover and find a mouse hole and not say anything. So here today, we might say, oh, how is this person doing? And we might say, oh, the person's in a Philadelphia situation, meaning that everybody has scattered like mice and cockroaches, and the light came on, right? I'm speaking in metaphor. The light came on and everybody scattered, right? Went all places but to help the person. So it's just so interesting to me how pop culture also acts as a place and time, like a placeholder for us, to understand the use of language, linguistic, sociolinguistic, sociocultural language, you know, marks a time and place to represent a particular phenomenon, an illness, uh, a war event, a medical event, psychosexual event, that it does become so important. You know, sometimes when I speak about this to persons my age, we have like these aha moments. We say, oh, yes, I never thought of it that way. How influenced we are sometimes by film, right? I'll give you another one. You remember the film Matrix? There's an oldie, right? I don't want to say old. I guess we'll say vintage, classic. And there was the part, this was new to us, not new to you, new to us, the use of these computer-aided graphics design that showed us all these sort of high-tech moves, high-tech values in the film. And very often in arenas with mothers, especially, we would all laugh. I would say 1990s, we would say, oh, the kid pulled a Matrix move. And we all knew what that meant. We didn't have to go into it. We didn't have to have a big lead up to it. We just all knew exactly what that meant. Just like today in pop culture, if we say the word sexting, I know what that means. You don't have to explain it to me like I'm in second grade and have somebody hold my hand and lead me into it. I know exactly what it means that somebody's sexting. I know what it means, like to say in language, ghosting. I know exactly what it means. I don't need anybody to explain it to me, lay the foundation, develop it for me. I just know it means what it means. I get it. Pop culture really has influenced not only how we understand relationships, how we see relationships, how we speak about relationships, but it really sometimes sets a tone, right? Nomenclature, it sets phrase, sometimes one, two words can tell the whole story. I remember when my daughter's 37, and I remember when she was a teenager before college years, like I would hear her speak with her friends, right? And they would have this phrase. This was the phrase. They would say, well, the person's very Abercrombie. So at first I thought, okay, this means they like to go and shop at Abercrombie and Fitch. This is what I was thinking at the time as a 40-year-old person. And then I came to realize after hearing the context over and over again that what it meant is that the person wanted to be discovered because I didn't get the part. I just wouldn't have gotten the part until somebody explained it to me, where people back in the day used to just go into Abercrombie to get discovered because apparently Abercrombie would find models that were shopping in their store. They'd take everyday persons and turn them into billboards. So then I came to understand when somebody would say, well, they're very Abercrombie, meaning they want to see and be seen. They're waiting to be discovered. They're waiting to get the tap on the shoulder, that they're the chosen one, etc. So it's just sort of interesting to me. Sometimes I hear people in their late 30s will be dialoguing and I'll throw it out. I'll say, oh, it's very Abercrombie. And they'll say, oh, you know what that means? Yes, I know what that means. Or they'll say, oh, that's very single white female. And I'll say, yes, very single white. Or they'll say, well, it's, a whole fatal attraction situation. So it gives us an opportunity for different generations to also have these sort of, candid meeting places in language, literature, literary, cultural studies to have this shared moment. So I guess that's what I'd like to leave you with, that sometimes we think we're all so different in sharing ideas, observations, but we're really not. Sometimes we're even speaking the same language. We just really don't realize it. Sometimes people that are vintage, that's a nice way to say it, older persons, sometimes we bring with us a lot of historical reference to film. We bring, I remember my grandmother, who would be like 111 if she were alive. She would say, well, it's very Gone with the Wind. So now I sort of understand, what that means. Or another place I would hear her use film as a reference, pop culture. She would say, well, Land of Oz, Land of Oz. So, that's taken from The Wizard of Oz. The whole idea is, it's really not true. It came birthed from a high fever, a bad dream. Anything can happen behind the curtain. The Wizard of Oz. We just don't get to see what he's doing. So that's how I interpret that. So if we think about these dynamics, every culture and every generation sort of has this reference to something on the big screen or some place that they've, read something. I'll leave you with a thought. Your parents probably have a 50 Shades of Grey example. They'll say, oh, well, very 50 Shades of Grey, you know? So it's interesting to listen to it in cultural studies. And That's what I wanted to share with you today. If you ever have a chance to see Fatal Attraction, every now and then it's on Hulu. I would suggest you see it not once, but twice. See it from the perspective of Alex, see it from the perspective of Dan, and you'll see you're watching two completely different films. You know, time and place, cultural studies, etc. Well, I hope you have a blessed day. I'm off to the lake today. It's all kinds of rainy out. 50 shades of rainy. There you go. It's rainy. It's a little chilly, but I don't care. We love to go to the lake. I love to see all of the birds fly back in from the south, see all the critters that are out. Sort of my little take on day camping. So I wish you well, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend. You be good. Bye-bye.